And joining us now from Detroit is Richard Burr. He is the politics and government editor for the Detroit News. Richard, thanks for joining us. We're so happy to have you. Why is Michigan such an important campaign stop for the president?
Well, it was one of the final states he won in 2016. In fact, it was the state he won by the slimmest margin, 10,704 votes, or 0.2 of a percentage point. And it was part of a block of 3 states, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania being the other 2, that had traditionally gone for Democrats for several decades. And he broke through here and there. And Grand Rapids holds a special place of importance for him because it was his last stop in the 2016 campaign. He added it at the last second when Hillary Clinton came to town and decided to campaign here. And he literally spoke his last words on the campaign trail after 1 o'clock in the morning on November 8th of 2016, and he predicted he would win. And he did so, and he's been taking several victory laps of sorts ever since visiting the state a couple of times after he was elected.
Yeah, he referenced that last visit there to Grand Rapids before the election. So, you know, Richard, we heard the president's calls for increased security and a wall at the U.S.-Mexico border. All of that received a loud amount of applause from the audience there. Michigan, though, is nowhere near Mexico. Is building a wall really an issue that's important to voters there?
I think it's important to Trump voters, and I think it's important perhaps to rural voters who may blame some of their economic woes on illegal immigration or on the loss of jobs. And for those people who don't feel as though that issue is being addressed, it's important to them. I will say that on a direct test of the immigration issue, when the government was shut down for a record-setting 35 days, there was polling done right after the shutdown was ended, and 45% of Michigan voters blamed the shutdown on Trump. Another about 22% blamed it on Democrats, and another 20% or so kind of spread the blame among both Republicans and Democrats. So I think if you're saying if it's a super popular issue, it's not. It's more of a niche issue here among certain voters.
So it sounds to me like what you're saying is that the president is vulnerable in Michigan, that he cannot take that state for granted going into 2020.
No, he can't. Last year, Democrats swept the top of the statewide offices that had been held by Republicans for 8 years: governor, secretary of state, and attorney general. And the Republicans lost 2 congressional seats, and they lost some seats in the state house and the state senate. And it was blamed in part on an anti-Trump mood in the state, and a poll in January found that if people had their druthers, more than 50% would vote for somebody else not named, and another, 25-30% were still okay with Trump. But that's but in an election, it doesn't matter what you ask about Trump in abstention. What really matters is who exactly is he going to be matched up with, and then we'll really have a firmer feel. But he does start at a disadvantage this time around. He just narrowly won here, and he appears to be slightly back on his heels, and I think that's why he wanted to come back.
Yeah.
And the Grand Rapids area actually is now kind of considered a new battleground in the state, even though it traditionally has been considered kind of a traditional conservative GOP area.
So he's starting the battle early there. All right, Richard, President Trump also called for full funding of the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. The Environmental Protection Agency and the new federal budget had proposed cutting some of that funding. Can you explain what's at issue here, and how significant is the president's involvement in this issue?
Well, it's somewhat significant. The reason the money's important is that the $300 million goes to fund a variety of cleanup and other programs around the Great Lakes states, and it's viewed as additional money that state governments may not have to do cleanup in rivers or to work in wetlands or such things. And so for the last 2 or 3 budgets, the president's budget officials have sought a 90% cut of $270 million out of the $300 million Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. And people, Democrats and Republicans across the aisle in the Michigan delegation have always fought that. And apparently, when the president arrived in town tonight, Representative Bill Huizenga, who's a former co-chairman of the Great Lakes caucus in Congress, was able to get the president's ear and say, hey, could you back off on this? This is really important. And the president did so. And what's interesting is you can tell it's campaign season already, because in a space of 4 hours, the president backed off on 2 budget cuts. First, for the Great Lakes Initiative, and secondly, before he left the White House, he backed off on this proposed $17.6 million cut for Special Olympics in the Department of Education budget, something that Education Secretary Betsy DeVos was taking a lot of flack over for the past couple of days.
All right, Richard, thank you. Richard Burr of the Detroit News. We appreciate your insight.